mission's purpose was the door opener for me. And so that's where proposals fall at their greatest, is really explaining the vision, because quite often vision has strategy stuck in it. For example, at the rescue mission, when people asked us what our purpose was, I never said beds, social services. I said we were evangelists to the poor. And this was in '83, and I was a very uneducated, accidental leader. But I knew the elements of integral mission or holistic mission. I just didn't know how to be articulate about it, but I knew that evangelism, that we wanted people to access the Holy Spirit as an agent of change in their life to help them out of their circumstance. And so we felt if we couldn't preach or lead or teach about Christ, then we wouldn't be able to help the homeless. But then secondly, we also realized that you can't preach to a hungry man. And so for me, evangelism meant both the life here on earth and the life in the hereafter. And so I would explain to people, we're evangelists to the poor, the least, the last, and the lost on the streets of your county. And that was all the purpose statement that we needed. And so I focused on helping people give me the essence of what purpose was. And so I'll just say, when you can answer 3 questions in an articulate paragraph or 2, you can nail this. And the questions are, what is God showing me? That can be research-based, but it's my belief that we all have a calling. All of us, one framework or another, whether we're a plumber or a college professor, we have a calling. If we're sensitive to what God is doing with us and saying to us, we're going to understand our calling to be the best used car salesman or the best preacher on a Sunday morning. We're just going to do our best to be before God what He's asked us to be. And you can start seeing the need, because if you are sensitive to your calling, you'll start seeing that calling. You'll start seeing places where that calling can be applied all the time. And what I'm saying is, be articulate about that photograph or that video of what you see, because I believe God will show it to you. And then it should be research-based. You should go as deep into that as you can so that you become an expert in that pathology that you believe God is calling you to address. And I can go into the secular or the marketplace version of that, but for mission, it's what's the pathology that you're going for? You know, if in sales, it would be, what's the need of the customer? And family transportation, or is this guy trying to attract a wife and he wants a convertible? I mean, yeah, I don't know. I could go off on that, but I won't. So in understanding what you see, then the next question is the more difficult question to ask yourself, and that is, what are you telling me to do about it, God? What are you telling me to do about this need? So back to the rescue mission analogy, which is the easiest for me to use to explain this, it would be, when I said we were evangelists to the poor, the first answers that I gave to that question is, well, we provide we provide beds, we provide meals. Actually, our biggest mission, it was an address. It turned out in those days, if you didn't have an address, you weren't a human being as far as the social services. So you can get your Social Security check, your state disability check, your VA benefits, all the things that the homeless have available to them that they don't access. And so we gave addresses out to the home. We gave our address out to the homeless, and the social services knew me, and they knew the mission, and they knew we were doing it. And they didn't care that there were 600 people at any one time living at the rescue mission. They had a way of doing their job now. And we had a way of making sure that the homeless got their checks just by giving them an address. Well, I could have put that in our purpose statement, but I didn't, because it was just our strategy. And strategies change all the time. And so if your purpose, that would make your purpose changeable all the time. So that's why I kept that at the purpose level. And so answering that question is always boiling down into the essence of what your calling is. And so if I saw your purpose, and that when there was a connection there, and I saw your character, then I went to your ideas and your strategies, because your purpose gave context to them. So if I'm an evangelist to the poor, how am I accomplishing that? Well, my strategy at the rescue mission at that time is we had a nightly service. Later, we went into counseling and other kinds of, we had volunteers sit at the meals with the homeless to try and create some relationship, and so they could actually pour out their hearts a little bit about what was going on in their lives and begin to access the gospel that way. But we had very deliberately trained and prepared strategies for that. Well, that's what costs money, because that required staff and time and place. You needed a space where you could gather them and work with them. So your ideas make sense in light of your purpose. And so I would then look at the ideas and how well were they articulated in the proposal. And once I was satisfied that the idea made sense in the context of their purpose, then I would look at their track record. And that was the fourth thing I would look at. And their track record was my way of looking backwards to look forward. And that would help me decide whether the amount or the size of the gift, what would be an appropriate approach. So let's say this was a new ministry that had come up with an articulation and were attempting to launch a new idea. Well, I don't care if it was World Vision with a new S-curve or a local feeding station somewhere. Your track record determined the size of the gift. And also helped me understand, were you a truth teller? So in your track record, were you willing to say your failures? Or was it just like a resume where it was only the highlights? So another thing that drove me crazy in proposals was there was no room for experimentation, and no room for showing me how you question success and study failure. Because if you don't study failure, if you ignore failure, then you ignore an essential training element that God has in our lives. I literally can remember in my early walk praying to God, I really learn better through success, Lord, than failure. and discovering that no, it was really the opposite. That the most potent lessons were the ones where I was slammed with something I had tried, or some failure on my part, and if I could study that failure and unpack it, I generally had a better way of avoiding doing it again, and could see another way to go at it. And so that's the kind of thing that drove me nuts, was organizations that did not acknowledge their failures or did not acknowledge their, and I understand their fear. The fear is that I'm going to be compared to other ministries. There's this competitive nature to fundraising that you have to deal with if you're going to do it. And you have to deal with your own fear of it. And it always comes down to the same thing, that there's got to be this fixed pie. Well, for each donor, there is a fixed pie. There is a limit to which they will give. And if they want to make decisions on foolish ideas, such as return on investment, that somehow you can compare one ministry to another. I actually sat in a meeting, and my guess is, Mary, you have as well, where a donor will say something to a missionary as if, well, what's your return on investment? I actually sat in a meeting one time, and Zenit was at this meeting as well, where a donor stood up and said, I've got two ministries that I looked at recently. One was providing this many baptisms per dollar, and the other was providing a much lesser number. And he said that in response to some missionary who had made some pronouncement in the room that had irritated him. And I thought, oh my goodness. But then I decided to go deeper into what I think he was actually trying to say. And this is a really important thing for me when I'm looking at these proposals. He was actually saying, I think, return on investment is everything to me because I live and die by it. My business requires, I'm in a cutthroat environment. Anybody that's in business is literally in a even if he's got a barber shop, there's another guy down the street selling haircuts for $1 less. And so you're constantly in this struggle for survival and supremacy in your business. And if you've got that struggle, and the way you fight that struggle is to know your numbers cold, so that you can compare your sales factors to what my sales factors were last year at the same time, what they should be, what my costs are. They think missions and missionaries do not have the same disciplines that they do, that they don't do the evaluations, that they don't understand numbers. The whole outcome eras in funding, which I was a part of, slammed into missions with this kind of thinking. And missionaries got fired, missions got turned down for their grants because they were not articulate in answering their evaluative and reporting questions. And dealing with this mindset that, are you as disciplined in your work? Are you in a, I mean, I realize you're working in a tough place and working on a nasty situation. You're trying to alleviate, because every proposal for a water well, for let's say, talks about how many children die because of unclean water, and that if we had clean water, we can bring this down. Here's our track record. I'll show it to you. And then you realize, for $3,000 I can do this well, or $5,000 I can do this well. Well, they don't necessarily trust that your market analysis of what you're doing and your effectiveness is driven by a drive for efficiency, which lowers costs against profits, lowers costs against revenue and increases profits. They're wondering, are you doing that? And is the guy that can give me 100 baptisms per dollar doing it better than you, who's doing 10 baptisms per dollar? And if you're going to do any kind of fundraising for Christian mission, and you're not aware of that's what's a donor's thinking when they're reading your proposal, you're not really understanding the mindset of some givers who have not learned how to get past that thought, because it's a very difficult thought to get past if you're a successful business person.